Good morning, fellow Toastmasters. Today we are going to talk about cross-cultural communications. Let me And can everyone see my screen? Yes, excellent. I do a dual version when I am presenting, so I always have to make sure that I'm sharing the right side. Thank you all for being here today or watching this in the recording, whichever it may be. Today we are going to talk about cross-cultural communications. What is it? Cross-cultural communications is just that. It is the exchange of information, ideas, feelings to and from people from different cultural backgrounds, different ethnicities, different countries, different regions within your own country. People from different cultures or areas or countries will have different values, beliefs, norms, and customs that are unique to them. And we always have to kind of be a little bit aware of that. Communication is both verbal and nonverbal. We communicate daily in things like business, education, tourism, personal relationships, and Toastmasters. Toastmasters is an international organization with clubs in countries all around the world. Not only that, our own District 100 has members and leadership from other parts of the world. Is Ed a district or area director this year? I can't remember, just district director, correct? Heather?
What was the question?
I said Ed, he's a district director this year.
He's a division director.
Division director, that's what I meant. So Ed is a division director and he is homed in the Philippines. So we have fellow Toastmasters that we are interacting with all of the time who may have different values, beliefs, norms, customs, different ways of communicating. Politeness and etiquette. But I'm polite. I say please and thank you. On your way. Pardon me. But politeness and etiquette will differ depending on where you are. I have an example up here just within the United States. In the South, it's yes, ma'am. Thank you, sir. By your leave. Hello, Miss Heather. It's so fun when you go to the South. Miss Jonni, they will call me. But you go to New York, someone will bump into you and you're lucky if you get a little head nod and people just keep moving. It is a different culture. They don't place a high value on, oh, excuse me. Oh, pardon me. Thank you. Please. People have things to do and places to go and they're not going to be offended. It's a very dense city. There's a lot of people. You don't have time to say, excuse me and pardon me, trying to get through the streets. So verbal versus nonverbal communication. Studies show between 70 to 93% of our communication is nonverbal. So what is nonverbal communication? Vocal variety, body language, hand gestures, things we are being taught and learning in Toastmasters. It can also be facial expressions and physical behaviors. In 1971, a behavioral psychologist in UCLA, Professor Dr. Albert Mehrabian, I can say this, I promise, came up with what they call the 738-55 rule. And it is still used a lot today, especially when it comes to teaching things like sales and business communications. 7% is what we say, the words coming out of our mouth. 38% is our vocal tone. And 55% is body language. A good example of this may be someone saying, you know, yes, I can do the thing, but their body language is drawing in. Their vocal tone drops. So sometimes even when someone might be saying yes, their physical reaction is telling you something different. So we must pay attention to the cues around us when it comes to nonverbal communications. We can look at a lot of cultures as having a direct versus an indirect way of communicating. I have an example there. Please pass the butter. Western cultures, direct communication. You ask for what you want. Eye contact is considered respectful or a show of confidence. It is seen as honesty, openness, and assertiveness. However, in many Eastern cultures, they use an indirect form of communications. Asking for something directly is often considered disrespectful. You use cues or suggestions. The butter is over there. That's letting people know that you would like the butter. They use more suggestive language or body language to try to say what they want. Direct eye contact may be considered to be seen as rude or disrespectful. Indirect communication is considered respect or politeness. So what could go wrong? When we are dealing with cross-cultural communications, there's a lot of things to take into consideration when speaking with someone from another country or culture. Humor. What is funny to me may not be funny to someone from a different culture. Even between two countries that share a language, humor could be vastly different. In many cultures, making political or religious jokes is a big no-no. In the US, it's not uncommon for us to make fun of our friend right to their face. Hashtag blame Heather. Inside joke, but she laughed for those who can't see her on screen. But in other cultures, making a joke about another person, especially in front of other people, is considered very disrespectful. Eye contact. I mentioned this in our direct versus indirect communication slide just previously, but it may be seen as disrespectful to authority figures or as aggressive. In Japan, Japanese culture, it is considered rude to make direct eye contact with someone of a higher status. It is more appropriate to avert your eyes or to look down. In Thai culture, it is considered rude to make direct eye contact with anyone of a higher social status or someone who is older than you. And in Saudi Arabia, it is considered rude to make direct eye contact with someone of the opposite sex. Indigenous Australians, in some of their cultures, it is considered rude to make direct eye contact with someone who is grieving. In addition to cultural norms that I just mentioned, there's a number of other factors when it comes to making direct eye contact that is considered rude even in our very direct Western culture communication style. For example, the intensity of the eye contact, the duration, and the context. If I am sitting at a bar and someone is making extended direct eye contact at me, that could be very creepy. They may think they're being suave. So we always have to be careful, even within our own culture. Personal space. Standing close together when speaking may not be the norm here. We're used to our little, this is my personal bubble. Please do not enter my personal bubble. However, in other cultures, such as the Middle East and South America, it's not uncommon for them to stand really close when talking, even touching shoulder to shoulder. Latin America and Southern Europe, for example, people tend to touch each other more frequently and intimately. It is considered friendly, warmth, affection. In East Asia, people are more likely to avoid touching each other, especially in public. In the Middle East and North Africa, there are very strict rules about who can touch whom, especially between men and women. That is very taboo. So if you are in one of these countries or around some people who are from those countries, something to keep in mind to Avoid touching people of the opposite presenting gender because can be very rude to them. The United States and Canada, we're kind of middle of the road, moderate touching, but we still like our personal bubble. And finally, greetings. Countries such as Japan and China bow as a greeting. We tend to do something like shake hands. In Brazil, they will touch cheeks. Some countries do cheek kisses. It is always best to go with the flow where you're at, although it is also always all right to say, have personal boundaries if you don't like to be touched or don't want to be touched. But if someone bows to you as you hold out your hand, bow back. They may very well likely extend their hand. There is this kind of bow handshake that a lot of Eastern and Western cultures do when meeting, especially in business now, that they used to not do in the past. There are so many other things, such as gift giving, punctuality. In some cultures, showing up on time is considered early and rude. I'm not done making dinner. Come back in 15 minutes. And decision making. So these all vary, but they aren't as germane to communication as these other topics. So I left them out, but just something to keep in mind if you're going to travel. But I scored 5 in hand gestures on my last speech. A few things to think about when it comes to hand gestures when dealing with people from other cultures or countries. Thumbs up. I approve, we are in agreement. This is what this means. However, in Islamic and Asian countries, it is an insult. Also, if you take a thumbs up and you kind of do a jerking up motion like that, you're not saying thumbs up, you're saying something entirely different that maybe you can figure out by the gesture itself. And also, if you have a thumbs up and you flick your thumb off of your teeth, that is the equivalent of saying F you in some places. Peace, V for victory. We've all done those selfies. However, if you turn it the other direction, you are now flipping someone off in the UK or Australia. So always remember, V is for victory, palm out. The OK sign. We're good to go. I am A-OK. However, this is akin to calling someone an a-hole in Brazil, especially when flipped down, you're kind of making a rude gesture. And unfortunately, the OK sign has also been hijacked by white nationalists. It is considered the white power symbol. Usually they will be held down or the fingers spread very wide, held up to the chest. So you can usually tell the difference between someone going, no, I'm okay, versus something that we don't want to think about. Dang them for taking a perfectly fine hand gesture and messing it up for the rest of us. And last but not least is the Corona sign, or as we in the US and who enjoy heavy metal, the devil horns. You see this frequently. People who enjoy louder heavy metal music will throw this sign up. It's also the symbol for the Texas Longhorns football team, which is a college in Texas. It is a positive sign in both Hinduism and Buddhism. However, in many countries in Europe, they still see this as the sign of the devil, and it is considered rude. Fun fact, this sign can also be used to indicate that one's spouse is cheating on them in countries such as Italy, Brazil, Cuba, Spain, and Portugal. We are all in Toastmasters to learn how to be better communicators. Toastmasters mission states we provide a supportive and positive learning experience in which members are empowered to develop communication and leadership skills, resulting in greater self-confidence and personal growth. But a few things to keep in mind for our interpersonal communications. Cultural awareness. Be aware of the cultures around you. Sometimes you may have to adjust your worldview or understanding in order to understand them better. Have empathy. Put yourself in other people's shoes. Respect their way of communicating. People don't have to change to fit your communication styles. We should all do a little dance to understand each other better, but respect how other people communicate. And of course, being in Toastmasters, we are all working on our communication skills. When you're not sure about what someone means, ask. If you're in a direct style communication culture and you're dealing with someone who is more indirect and they say the butter is over there, you may get confused. Why are they pointing out that the butter is over there? If you're not sure, ask, would you like the butter? So always, whether you're speaking in business setting or in Toastmasters, you know, what we learn in Toastmasters doesn't always translate into interpersonal skills. Do your homework. If you're going to travel, do your homework. If you live in a community where you have a large influx of people moving from other countries into your neighborhood, learn a little bit about their communication style. They will seem a lot less foreign. Folks move to our country and we expect them to what? Change and fit into how we do things. When we can learn a little bit about how they communicate and maybe we can all meet in the middle and understand each other better. Does anyone have any questions? And if anyone's curious, those little flags on the bottom is a little bit about my cultural background and what I'm used to, which is, of course, USA. Forget all those hand signs. My family were Russian immigrants. However, my mother was born in Mexico. I grew up in East LA. So these are the cultures I identify with the most and what I grew up with and has reflected in how I communicate and behave. Do we have something? Ah, yes. I'm not sure where that Angel had posted. This is so true. It's why you see CEOs being forced to step down at times, but I'm not quite sure where that came in at.
I'll say prime example of this was Margaret Page. It's literally been posted to the public that there were some comments made in one of her speeches that in her respective culture were fine. But because of the speech was delivered to a different culture and they took it differently, she resigned because she felt that she should have known better. But it's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing with Elon Musk. Elon Musk was asked to step down from Twitter as CEO. He was asked to step down from Tesla as CEO because his communication is too brash for most of the world. And so being able to do the skills we're talking about today and change the way you're speaking based on who you're speaking to is highly important.
I often find a middle of the road approach works best. Be aware, if you're a more direct communicator, be aware of the fact that other folks are not as direct. Before this even all started, Raven, who is here today, was talking about crafting her icebreaker speech. And coming from an Asian culture where when you're younger, you respect authority, you don't speak up. So she was finding it really hard. Where do I start? What do I say? You know, so sometimes, and I think Toastmasters is a great place where people can learn to find their voice. Yes, Judy. I see your hand up.
Do you remember the Toastmasters president who resigned, who resigned under duress because of her comment or whatever to a club? Was that racially biased, or do you think you know, what her intention may have been humorous. I don't know. I'm just wondering.
That was before my time, I believe, so
Was that the same reference that Angel was making earlier?
I think it is. And reading the articles and knowing kind of a little bit of what happened, while it was not intended to go across that way, it was racial, by the way. The perception and the reception is what counts. You can intend best, but when you are at that level, it doesn't matter what you intend. Because if you're the CEO of Apple and you go out there and say that people who use Samsung are trash and dirt and maggots and eat crap off the ground, then you're going to ruin your company. Because no matter what, whether you intend it as a joke, the world isn't going to see it that way. And so while it's, certain issues around like that are get more and more relevant and more pressing as you move up in your career, like starting right now, like as we've witnessed, you can tell someone you need to wear pink more, or you need to smile more, and that's a direct sign of aggression to some women. You look at someone wrong on the subway, you never know if they're going to shoot you the next day. It's the reality we live in, just inside the United States.
But
Some
that
people-
also reflects the problem with this generation. That leaves us like, what are we supposed to do in this cultural melting pot of the USA? You know,
my best
if we bow or shake hand, we're going to offend the other if we challenge.
my best recommendation to this is, it's not a problem with this generation. This generation has just vocalized it. This is a multi-generational problem. However, it's also why certain countries used to refuse working together vehemently and are now working together in this day and age, because we are more culturally aware and we are more concerned with making sure we don't offend the other side. In the past, it was like, if I offended you, we'll go stop crying about it and go play in the corner. It also comes down to education. It's something I am very passionate about. It's why I'm pursuing my PhD. Educating yourself, learning is going to help. Don't take it as a, well, I can't go and just do anything because I'm going to offend someone. Take it as a, oh my God, if I offend them, I can learn from that and not do it next time.
Yeah, but Margaret paid a high price, because she was not given a second chance. And if she were to be in a different location, there's no way she could have been, should I say,
But
be able to.
Well, I mean, just to say, Angel did hit it on the head with their comment regarding in the newer generation, the younger generation know because they are so interconnected. When I mentioned those hand gestures, for example, a lot of countries where I mentioned that this may be seen as offensive, for younger people, they know. We have all been online for a really long time. You click the thumbs up on Facebook, everyone around the world is on Facebook. So depending on generational or their connectiveness online, some of these hand gestures, although don't do that in the UK, you're flipping someone off. But whether you believe someone should have gotten a second chance or not,
I mean, let me add on to that, Johnny, just for context. So if you take Margaret Page in context and you just look at that one situation, it seems drastic. However, if you travel to another country and offend some of them, they will kill you. They will not give you a second chance. They will throw you in jail for the rest of your life. If you go to some of the South American countries or the Middle Eastern countries or even Asian countries, they will just lock you up. They aren't going to give you a second chance. And so that's certain things that weren't brought to light before. And so when you take Margaret Page in context, so yeah, she's offended someone from across the world. She had to step down. But if she traveled to another country and offended them like that, and then they got really mad. They could have just killed her right there, and no one could have said anything. So I guess it's like perspective is a big thing.
I think that's something I could have added in my slide. Just don't ever make racial jokes.
And that
You
is
know,
sad.
there are jokes I can make with some of my Black friends that out of context with another group of Black Americans, for example, they would look at me and go, just no, girl, no. So racial jokes should just be left in your pocket, out of your head.
And a side note on someone who's representing Toastmasters, which is an international organization, needs to be particularly aware of how their comments are going to be taken culturally. And at the very least, they should have a handler that will review their content and make sure that they're not going to be offensive. Just as a background, I work in tech, and I was interviewing with a candidate who was from an Arabian culture that did not contact with women. And I went for a handshake, and I had to actually go back and retrofit my knowledge of why he wouldn't do a handshake. He ended up not wanting the job because he didn't feel he could work for a woman. I needed to know that difference, that I shouldn't be offended by that. That was a cultural thing, and it was not anything that I did, or it was not necessarily misogynistic in the normal stance of misogyny. It was just that was a trained cultural religious thing that was part of his world.
You man. I mean, what?
On the other hand, we're supposed to be engaging with our audience. We're supposed to, and if the audience is so diverse that it really binds our hands, you're not able to fully, I say,
I
be
would say
yourself. You always be walking on eggshell, trembling and shaking. Well,
it's
and no
I would say,
audience.
Judy, it's not necessarily a walking on eggshells. It's expanding your breadth of knowledge and what you can and can't talk about. It's not that you're risking offending someone. It's that you're being respectful of another culture.
And I think there's a difference between if you are giving a presentation to a group that is primarily of a particular country or culture, then you should be aware of their communication style and how they might perceive certain things you say. If you're giving a speech to a Toastmasters group and it is mixed culturally, then you can probably be pretty safe with whatever the dominant, primary culture is that they are all living in. Because even if they personally are an indirect communicator, if you are being direct in your presentation or speech, you're not going to offend anyone. A lot of my tips had to do more with interpersonal. Just being aware if you're having a one-on-one or group conversation outside of a presentation or, in a Toastmasters setting, that to be aware of, especially if you travel.
An example, speaking on behalf of my company to international groups. As I just did recently, you're never gonna not offend anyone. That's something everyone needs to accept. The difference is, and it's whether you're willing to grow in certain aspects or not, it's not tailoring your speech every time. What you're doing, and this was actually written in the APA 7th edition. It's why all APA documents going forward have to be gender neutral, non-biased, and non-discriminatory, is because there is actually a way to give speeches and talk about things and write things that don't offend other cultures. All it is being mindful, taking a step back and just reviewing it. The other part of that is, if you do, I'm sorry, goes a long way, or I will take that into consideration in the future. I did not mean it in that way, but I do appreciate the fact that it offended you. Even if you don't agree with someone, acknowledging them and just being apologetic towards it helps. I will say cuss words in my speeches. And if I don't know if a club's acceptable of that, I normally add a sensory warning in the beginning. That's another thing you can do. Add warnings in the beginning of your speech if you are covering anything racially charged or politically charged, or you're cussing. Add an advisory at the beginning of your speech. Let them know you're going to be talking about that, and then they're better prepared. And then for those people in those specific cultures that don't want to hear a woman cuss or something like that, they could just go get coffee or something while you're giving your speech, and they'll be perfectly fine. So it's not necessarily tying your hands. It's challenging you to think in other ways to better communicate with the world around you. It's expanding your reach rather than limiting it. Because in the past, you used to give a speech, it was to one group of people, it was to a specific demographic, and that's the only people you ever fit in with, and that's the only people you could speak to. Now, no, honey, if you're an American, you're going to speak to the Chinese people later, you're going to speak to the Indians later. No, it expands your mind, it expands your ability to communicate with other cultures and deliver value.
Yep, and I'll throw down that the evaluation portion of our organization and learning the evaluation skills, when someone comes and gives you feedback on something that they found inappropriate, that is not a, oh my God, I screwed up. That's a, I'm sorry, move on, incorporate it into your next thing. You've now learned, you've now gotten a valid evaluation that you can make use of. The other thing I wanted to call out is it's not necessarily a generational thing. It's a availability of information. Now that we have the internet, now that everybody's connected and you see these things, you learn things that you wouldn't have learned unless you'd gone and visited those countries before. So it's an expanding of knowledge. It's not necessarily a restriction of what you were able to do.
And speaking of evaluations, remember, evaluations is always one person's opinion. I've gotten evaluated that I used too many I didn't use enough hand gestures. And then my next speech, the same evaluator told me I used too many hand gestures.
No, it's also why if you look at the United States, we not only have a president who represents us, we have a secretary of state who's to manage state affairs. We also have ambassadors to almost every country in the world that is specifically trained in their cultures and countries. That is because it is so valuable to have that. And we've had that longer than just this generation before internet. We've had this for years and years and years because they recognized it back then.
It's called the Encyclopedia Britannica. My parents scrimped and saved to get me a set of encyclopedias. I loved reading about William Taft. Don't ask me why I was a weird child. But yeah, no, my presentation was primarily just talking about interpersonal communications. However, just to reiterate that and ways in which we can just maybe think about how we are going to communicate, or to try to, maybe a few things I mentioned next time you talk to someone, you go, oh, I remember Jonni talking about direct versus indirect, or why won't that person look me in the eyes? Oh, it is probably cultural. Or it could also, be that they are neurodivergent, or maybe they recently had eye surgery and they can't look at you in the eyes. I have a friend who is legally blind. He can see, but he can only see peripheral. And he's a game designer, so go figure. But whenever he would talk to you, he would always say, I am not looking at your chest, because his eyes were looking here, but that's because he's looking out the top of his eyes to look at you. So he always, anytime he was talking to someone, he would say, I'm not looking at your chest.
It's never about perfection. It's about awareness and growth.
Oh, I'm perfect, honey.
Well, I mean, whether or not
weird,
we're perfect.
That's I think that wraps up my time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, on that note, should I stop recording?